category of changing that we talk about, which is Tibetan for changing. There are two sections. He's saying all things that are changing are either of physical matter or mind. Those are the two buckets he's having, that he's putting out there. And he's saying either all things are of some sort of physical substance or mind, which he's saying isn't the same kind of thing. And then under physical substance, he's saying there are two categories within that. And he's saying, well, one is sense powers, which are what? The five senses, right? And they call them sense powers. And then the other one is outside matter, which are the four elements, which are
earth, wind, fire, water.
Right, which we talked about last week. So then he draws and goes down to long pole under sense power. Says, okay, under sense powers, he's saying all five or one. He's saying, could it be possible that the mind comes from your senses, all five of your senses? Is it possible that your senses, the feelings that you have, well, not emotions that you feel, but the physical senses that you have, what you physically can touch, what you can smell, what you can see, what you can hear, are those in fact the material causes of your mind?
No.
Why not?
Because if you lose a sense or senses, you still have your mind.
You still have your mind, because it would be like if you lost one of the five senses, then a fifth of your mind. Sorry, a fifth of your mind would be gone, right? And in fact, we've all heard of studies where people actually lose a sense, and then what happens to other of their senses? They become heightened, right? And so he's saying, okay, well, if it were all five, then if one was gone, then your mind would be gone, right? So then he's like, okay, then is it just any one sense then? If it's not a collection, if it's one, could it be one of your senses? And the answer is no. And why is it no? Why would it be no? Why couldn't your mind come from your sense of smell?
Because if you lost your sense of smell, your mind still have a mind.
Right. Exactly. So then he's saying through process of elimination, your mind can't come from your sense powers. It's not your senses. And in fact, we go deeper into it. The next class that we talked about as the mind, and we're going to go through it over the quiz, but how the mind and the senses have a relationship and what that is. It doesn't mean that they don't interact with one another, but he's saying simply that your senses aren't the reason why your mind comes into existence. And so then he goes into outside matter. Is it possible that it's coming from the elements? Now, in Eastern philosophy, when they talk about elements, like when we think of earth, wind, water, fire, I don't know about you, but me, I go into like very quick elementary school visuals. You know, like water, blue, fire, red, like very literal, right? In Eastern philosophy, all aspects, all atoms, all molecules have an aspect of the four senses, the four elements. So it's not in the literal sense of what we think of in the Western tradition. It's basically saying all the different elements that you see, all the molecules that you see that create all the atoms, they all have these four elements. So he's saying, is it possible that, everything just has a different ratio of the elements? Like this would have a different ratio of water, wind, fire, and earth. It would probably be considered having more earth, because we talked last week that earth has a quality of what? Hardness, right? There's a certain hardness to earth quality, so it's just a different ratio. So he's saying, could your mind come from all four elements? Or is it, I mean, really, when he's having this conversation, he's basically saying, is your mind your brain, right? Ultimately too, right? Is it all the different atoms and neurons that come together to be able to make your mind? Is that true? No. Why not?
Because then if you got in a car accident and you had a head injury, then it didn't kill you, that means that you were 1/4 dead, and that's not true. You're still 100% alive. You just can't speak or something,
Yeah.
Or maybe nothing happens.
Yeah. Right, so what he's saying is that if you have, well, he's not saying anything about the car accident, but he's saying that if you, or had a quarter of your brain, but if you had one of the elements removed, if your mind in fact were all four of the elements in a composition of four, if one of them was removed, then your mind would no longer be able to function, right, or it wouldn't exist, right? Same argument as the sense powers. And the same goes to, it can't be just one of those, because if that was gone, then your mind no longer exists. So, he says, well then, clearly the mind isn't coming from physical matter, then let's look at mind as the other category. And he's saying, a lot of people think that your mind comes from your mom and your dad, or whoever your paternal parents are. And so, is it possible that the mind comes from another mind? That we talked about last week. Yes.
Speaking of car accidents, what really, like, what about people with like traumatic brain injuries, TBIs? Because, like, if someone's in a coma, their mind could still be completely intact. They just can't, it's like they can't, I don't know, speak or wake up or whatever. But people with TBIs, like depending on the severity, like something really does change. And like some people severely lose impulse control, or like there's something where the damage to the physical structure of the brain really like alters the personality.
Sure.
So what about that? And like, what about when damage to the physical structure of the brain
Affects the mind,
Yeah,
or at least what looks like it functions.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, sure, that, of course, I mean, the senses and the mind there is a connection there, right?
yes,
There's a connection, and there's also, I mean, from what we're perceiving too, there's also your karma. So when you, like in our tradition, in this philosophy, one would argue that, you know, when you have certain type of what looks like a physical disability, for instance, right, or you're incapacitated in a certain degree, or there's a physical like ailment or sickness, whatever that is, that's your karma. That also has implications as well. Now, your mind is connected to it because your mind and sense powers, how do those two work in hand? Not hand in hand, but how do they connect?
your mind causes
Your mind causes your sense powers, but your sense powers also gives your mind something to respond to, right? So when you have a situation where someone's in an accident and something happens physically to them, it is their karma that they're having a certain type of dysfunction that's happening in their physical body that then starts to impact. It wouldn't impact just the space of your mind. I mean, your mind has karma implications too.
Would it be easier to understand if you think of the mind as, think of the brain as an organ or an appendage, like an arm? So if you have Parkinson's, you're shaking. It's not your mind that's shaking, it's your body. If you have Tourette's, you might be saying really awful things. That's your brain, not your mind. If you know somebody who has Tourette's, there's nothing in their mind that makes them want to say something really nasty, but there's something in their brain that's misfiring. So it's an organ malfunction, not a mental.
I mean, you could also even argue like people who have physical disorders that are considered not fixable, and their mind actually is able to overcome and fix it physically for them.
But then I can think about someone, like let's say someone with really, really severe syphilis that went untreated for like years upon years upon years, and the brain, like when certain parts of the brain deteriorate, you lose, like you learn certain functionality to be able to function your body.
Yeah, sure. But it also affects your mind, like maybe, you know, like people go crazy or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can create an imbalance in your mind, of course.
Like personality,
Yeah,
shift, like.
Right, so we talk about personality disorders.
But it's not necessarily representative of the person's mind.
Versus
It's just a
brain.
personality change because of the damage that's happened.
I think that's my question, is I just, like, I'm following.
Yeah.
But I just find something is a little bit unsatisfactory, or like, I'm a little bit unsatisfied. I'm unsatisfied.
I don't know if it helps, but like what helps me a little bit is to think about like, even if a part of their brain isn't working and they don't have language anymore, right? They lost the capacity to speak. Their mind changed, it shifted, it's functioning differently. But all this is saying is that didn't mean the mind went away. It changed, it's not what it doesn't have the same, it's not responding in the same way or doing something as it was before, because mind changes. But it doesn't mean that mind went away and that there's not a thing capable of perceiving or doing whatever that function is. You know?
I mean, you're basically saying, is it possible that physical things affect the mind, right? Physical issues with your body can affect the mind.
I mean, I guess I'm curious as to like when I think I just want to understand more clearly, like actually what's happening, like really, what's happening, like what is firing, what chemicals are firing, what parts of my brain are lighting up when I do these things, and like where is it? Because we can feel, like when we meditate, like we feel these things. So like where are they and what is happening? And I guess like if these things happen, like Ram Dass, the spiritual teacher, right? He had a stroke and like his body was crippled, but his mind is not, and he talks about his stroke being grace. But there are people, like I had a really close friend who had a brain aneurysm, and he, like, it was just a really strange thing because he, like, recovered a lot of the use of his body, but not completely. And he had he had aphasia, like a short-term, like a memory problem. He also started meditating. Like, he was still there, but there was something, you could tell, like you could feel that there's something, I don't want to say off, but there's something that isn't, I don't know, there was something up here, like a break. And I'm following the things, and they're very helpful, and like I'm following, but I'm just still unsatisfied.
There's nothing about that, there's nothing about what you're saying though, that it's still being, no one's objecting that, because you're saying that if his injury affected his mind, and that would make sense. I mean, if I came in and decided to slam your toe with my computer, would that affect your mind?
Yes,
Yeah, if I punch you in the face, it's gonna affect your mind,
yes.
right? So imagine that you get into an accident that's traumatizing for your body, would it affect your mind? Sure,
Yes.
of course.
Okay.
That makes sense, right?
So then it's possible for these minds to recover. Or to,
Sure.
yeah.
I mean, your mind has the karma that we have to, so we'll go into karma tonight too, a little bit, not too crazy, because next course is all about karma. But there isn't, it's not like, the mind, it's not like this is your body and your mind is separate and it doesn't have an impact. Those two things are correlated, they have to be. And the way we talk about it is that in one of the arguments that were presented, which will go over class, right, was how the sense powers and the mind, like, what did it say? The mind was the basis, right, of your sense powers, and they are. I mean, in Eastern philosophy, they would say that to treat ailments from the outside in, which is how Westerners normally do it, it makes no sense. They're like, why didn't you start from the inside out? And it has to do with your subtle body, which also has to do with your mind. I mean, there's a lot of inner work that they do to fix your outer stuff. It's not, it's a whole different system of thinking. So the two they do work, and I mean, of course they work in tandem, right? So it's not to say that they don't impact each other. What he's saying though is that the mind doesn't come from your physical body. To your point, right, where you see people who are, you can have two people that have the same accident and the same type of damage and will have a two different experience from it. If it was consistently the physical body, then every time someone had the same type of accident or injury, the mind would equally be affected at all times, and it's not. So when it's different, right, that's your karma that you're shifting and seeing.
Okay.
Yeah?
And the mind it doesn't come from the four elements, this is matter, right? But in the West, we think of matter in terms of neurons firing and chemicals. Those are the four elements. The mind is not coming from those four elements. Mind is reacting to those elements. Mind is one of the answers to the question. The mind creates the senses.
Yeah.
So the mind is somewhere, say, observing what's happening in the mind.
Yeah.
So if you get any kind of trauma to your body, it's to your body, not to your mind. So if you're paraplegic and I kick you in the foot, you don't feel it. So your reaction is completely different than if you felt it.
Yeah.
All you have to deal with is the emotional trauma of, why is this guy kicking me? What a jerk.
Right.
Instead of, oh, it hurts, and he's kicking me.
Yeah.
But it's not created by the four elements
Yeah.
or by the
the
physical matter.
Yeah. Good for now. For now, that's good. I'll take it. So then he says, okay, is the mind going to be, is it coming from another person's mind? Is it coming from where is it genetic basically, right? Is it coming from another person?
Because if you came from another person's mind, then you would have the same characteristics and similarities.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that would be consistent, right? We would see it time and time again. That's probably a good thing for some people. And so then moving on, if it's not, so then he's saying if your mind didn't come from another person's mind, then the only other option then mind can be is from your own. And so therefore, if mind comes from you, where does that lead us? If mind comes from you, then it continually perpetuates, right? Which means then that this becomes one of the proofs that speaks to how mind never ends. There's never a beginning and there's never an end, because mind continues to create itself. So,
Who is this again? Who did this whole thing? What's his name?
this was Kendrick J. So, last week, quiz 8. What's the first question?
What is the basic principle underlying Master Dharmakirti's arguments in favor of past and future lives?
Does anyone remember what that is? It's a little cryptic, I think. But
We just talked about, right? Life produces life, life has to come from the previous life.
exactly, yeah, the material causes, right? Talking about life produces life. Second question.
In his first proof, Master Dharmakirti lists 3 characteristics that must have involved a previous life. Name them.
So Master Dharmakirti talked about 3 proofs last week. or not three, of his first proof. And this was the Tibetan for it, which you can have or not. And what were the three things that he talked about, the three characteristics? And what was he talking about?
Mind, breathing, sense powers / living tissue.
In relation to what? So what was he trying to do? Does anyone remember? There was 10 arguments that he was using to speak about mind.
The 10 proofs.
Yeah. So there were 10 proofs that he did that we went through last week. Now this is Master Dharmakirti, right? And he used a child, right? And the three different characteristics, the sensory powers, breathing, and a functioning mind as the cornerstone, really, to talk about his different proofs. So what was the next question?
Give 3 reasons why the 3 characteristics don't come from the elements.
Mm-hmm. And what were those?
They did not come from something similar. They did not come from a living being. And because there should never be cases where the elements fail to cause the 3 characteristics.
Cool. Great. Nice job. Class 9. First question.
What the other ones was the paper?
No, yeah, sure. The first question, let us consider the various elements in the form of the sense powers or living tissue. Explain why they are not the unique cause of the mind. And it's what we said before, where you can damage one of the sense powers without damaging the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Explain why mind is considered a basis for the sense powers rather than vice versa. The mind registers and enables the sense powers. I'm sorry,
Yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, what? Can you say that one more time?
It says the mind registers and enables the sense powers. It projects them.
Yeah, okay, good. What did you have for your answer? Yeah.
Yeah, we have the sense powers are a projection of the mind itself.
Yeah.
So the mind is causing the sense powers.
That's right. Okay, good. I was like, what? Sandy. What was question number 3? Oh, was it you?
Yeah.
You guys are funny. Question number 3.
Explain what keeps the mind itself going in this life, the basis for the state of the mind. And we answered this with the mind causes mind, so it's the mental karma of past life, which is keeping the mind going.
Right. Okay, great.
But I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Like, how does that necessitate mental karma of past lives? Like, why can we not just say it's the mental karma of this life that's keeping this life going, and then
Instead of saying that it's,
or is it, like, I'm just confused why mental karma of past lives comes into this group.
What produced this
Well,
moment of consciousness?
has to happen in your past. Yeah. And last question.
Explain why the mind of a normal person at the moment of death crosses into another state of mind of a similar type. And we talked about how a mind at that moment possesses desire for the previous state of mind or like the human life, and that's what causes rebirth in the same flavor of a human life.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. I'm just going to throw this up there in case any of you do want it. I do have Tibetan for proof number 7 and 8. I know, Santi, you asked about it last week. So I'm going to just throw this up there so you have it. And then we'll take a break, and then we're going to move on to class 10 tonight. So proof number 7, the Tibetan is Nik Nawa Nachelu. If you want that.
have it for proof 3, 4, 5, and 6?
We had it
I
for,
didn't have for any of them last time.
Well, we have it for like 1 and 2.
yeah, we had 1, 2.
'Cause I took photos.
I had 1, 2.
Oh yeah.
I think 3 through 10.
1 and 2, that's it.
Yeah, I didn't give you 3 and 10. I don't think I had those. I have 7 and 8 that I wanted to give you since I had it. I found it. Okay, this is the other one for number 10, 8.
Can you go back just for?
Oh, yeah, of course. Good. Yeah.
Going back to that, so the 4 elements are the basis of the sense powers, and you just talked about how the mind causes the sense powers.
It doesn't cause it. The basis. Yeah.
It projects it, isn't that?
The mind projects, the mind is the basis, not the, wait, this one here. Mind provides the basis for the sense powers.
Okay.
Mhm.
So what causes them, it has to be,
What causes the sense powers?
yeah.
Your karma.
It doesn't have to be something that has the same quality.
Oh,
as
what's the
sense powers.
material cause?
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah. So number 8 is tenpa, for those of you that need it. Okay, great. So what we're gonna do, let's take like a 7-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and start with course 10 and get into
Is there any
Proof
sort
of
of
future.
alternative to material cause then? Like, is there just material cause and cause?
Conditions, secondary causes, no?
There are secondary causes, which we talked about, right? Like if the secondary cause for a plant to grow, for instance, would be what?
Soil, sunshine, water.
So we have those. Okay, take a nice break, stretch your legs.
I mean, like right now, what plays me the most is just like it's like the incessant chatter. So if you don't have language, you still have the sensory input, and like babies are constantly crying, they're constantly like, some babies, right? So you know that they're reacting to sensation. But like if you were to have a mind that didn't develop language, you would still have the suffering of physical sensation, but like does the mind, I don't know, like what would happen?
I mean, a child doesn't have language, but they're very opinionated.
But what does that feel like in your body? Like what does that feel like in your body when you feel things, but
I mean, have you not been in situations where you are in a moment and you feel an overwhelming sensation, whatever that may be, and you cannot describe it with words because you just don't have the vocabulary?
yes.
Well then.
And so it's just constantly like that. Wow, that's overwhelming.
I think it sounds horrible. I mean, that's why kids get very, from what I've seen too, just when they have more of a cognitive awareness.
Well, I can speak from the parent aspect. Watching my two children, and being me, and looking at it from a Buddhist perspective. And it's not scripture, but newborns are pure mind Buddhists. They're not crying because they're upset, they're crying to communicate. And so as they start developing, all these human qualities start kicking in, and before you know it, they're adults and you're having political discussions with them that you don't want to be having, and all these stupid human things, like that are karma forces on us. But a baby, it's like, how do you not like a baby? Like, who doesn't like a baby, right? You have a normal human mind, you're looking at a baby like, wow.
Except when you're a mother and it's waking you up every 2
Yeah,
hours.
that part's not so great, but like that's our projection, right? That's what we have to deal with. With baby, it's just like, it's kind of like when you're doing the shamatha, you're trying to get rid of all this thought. You're trying to get rid of all the things. You're like, oh, it must be hard being a baby. They can't communicate. But actually, I think it gets harder when they start communicating.
Right.
Because we're really not good at language. We're really not good at expressing our emotions and our feelings. And most of our opinions, especially mine, we hold on to them too much. Babies don't.
Speaking of babies, if anybody has a class wants to see how this kid.
Oh, yes. Come on.
Yes. What's her name? Sion.
Oh
Oh my God, it looks like her. Those massive
Wait, when
eyes.
was she born?
Exactly a month ago almost.
Really?
It was like, yeah, it was April 11th, so like.
That's
That's
crazy. Okay, let's see how we're gonna get through this. Here we go. We have a lot to cover. We'll get through as much as we can. So last week we ended with proof number 10. Actually, technically it's considered an axiom. Just so you know, it's not technically a proof, it's an argument.
Wait, did we have this last week?
So last week I did not give you the Tibetan for number 10. Now I'm giving you the entire line. So the first one, can we say Telmope, Hike, Rispa, Chuchen? So that was consider the mind of a normal person at the moment of death. That's what Master Dharmakirti is saying. Okay. And the second one he's saying, can you say Rikpa, Chimar, Sam Jorte? The second one he's saying that mind will cross the line into a future mind. And then the third one, can you say Chakchen, Gi Rispa, Yinpei Cheer? That's because it possesses desire at the time of death. So the argument reads, the argument reads, consider the mind of a normal person at the moment of death. That mind will cross the line into a future mind because it possesses desire at the time of death. What on earth does that mean?
Well, if it possesses desire, it's created a karma, right? Yes?
Yes, sure.
There's desire and attachment. Would you say desire is attachment to
Nice.
something?
Okay, good. So let's go into it. We're going to talk about.
Can you just go back one second?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to talk about, can you say C10 Corlo?
C10 Corlo.
Again, C10 Corlo.
C10 Corlo.
So C10 Corlo is the wheel of existence or the wheel of life. This is how the 10th proof for the argument that we just looked at, this is how it works. The wheel of life is also considered the 12 links of dependent origination. It's another way that you might sometimes hear it. Is it up there?
You
No,
put- it
just
was for a
kidding.
second.
So there's 12 links.
12 links.
Links of dependent
Yeah. Oh,
What?
it's gone.
No, where is it going?
It's just
Don't
a
go
pause.
away. Okay, let's try that. What? Wait, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry, guys.
It's not copyrighted. You cannot
No. Like, what? So there?
Okay, there it is.
Okay. So this is the wheel of life. It has 12 different, well, there's a bunch of stuff going on. So I'm not going to go into it into detail, but I'll go into it enough where I'll get you some information about the wheel of life. Hector will sometimes do a whole kind of course or a few classes on the wheel of life, which is really lovely. If you're interested, request it from him and maybe different links. It's called the wheel of life. Sometimes you'll hear it as the circle of suffering, or sometimes you'll hear it as the wheel of samsara, all really very depressing iterations, I think. But basically what it is, it's showing the wheel of life. It is ultimately the wheel of life. It's why we are here and why we're suffering. The main link, so what you'll see on, oh, it's tiny, I'm sorry.
No, it's just, that's because the projectors.
Is it? Okay. So
to the wall.
there are 12 links. So what you'll see on the outside, like the outer rim, you'll see 12 different links, which are 12 different links to how the whole wheel of life starts and ends. What we're going to focus on tonight will be links 2, 8, 9, and 11, just so that you know. I'll just kind of quick, I'm actually glad I did this. I took Hector's slides. And so I'm going to just show you kind of like a close-up of the links so that you can see it. And we'll just go through them very quickly. So the first link is ignorance, that you'll see. The second link is called fresh karma. The third one is consciousness. The fourth one is name and form.
Name and form?
Yeah, the name and form. The fifth one is sense powers. Sixth one is contact. And the seventh one is feeling. So basically what happens between the first and through the seventh, after you're born, what starts to happen is ignorance. and then karmas are created. During this time, there's a bunch of things that start to happen. Like there are different milestones that you have. Your consciousness starts to form. You decide what's good and what's bad for you based on your sense powers, based on your 5 senses. So things start to come together, right? So I guess really to Thomas's point, when you have a child that comes out of the womb originally, they don't have all these, they're starting to develop all these different milestones where they're starting to look into the world, not all, but most, have an ignorant view on the world. And when we talk about ignorant view, it doesn't mean like, it means ignorant in the sense of self-existence. It's not ignorant in the sense of like, I was gonna say like you don't get it, but it is ignorant in the sense of you don't get it. It's not ignorant in the sense of inexperience. It's not like that kind of ignorance. Okay, and so then it goes into creating karmas. So link number 2 is where your first karma gets planted. And here, if you notice, it's a potter that's making a pot. So that's where your first karma starts to plant. Then you move into consciousness, name and form, and sense powers, contact, and then feelings. Moving into 8, it goes into a man that's eating, which is called the craving or the desire. And we're going to focus quite a bit on link 8 tonight. Link 9 is grasping, that follows after desire or craving. And it's a monkey grabbing a fruit. Then your karma ripens. Birth happens. And at link 11, this is 12. Oh, birth happens at a link 11. Yes, it is. Also, just so you know, the images on the right, those are block prints, like old ancient Tibetan block prints that were carved out of wood. I don't know, artists in here would appreciate that. So at link 11, it's a woman giving birth. That's where your karma ripens. So the karma that was planted on link 2, it takes 8 links in between for it to finally ripen. There's all these different steps that happen before your karma actually ripens. It's not like, I don't know, I give you $1 and then I suddenly get like $1 million back instantly. It doesn't work that way. There's a cycle that happens with your karmas. And what happens that we're going to talk about in particular is at link 8 and 9, the grasping and desire, or we're going to actually talk about it in terms of craving and desire. These 2 areas is what really flips your karma during your death process into your next rebirth. Okay. And then there's aging and death. Oops. And the cycle happens again. Okay. So that's the wheel of life. Okay.
Would you say the Wheel of Life, other names for it was?
There's a bunch. There's the wheel of suffering, the circle of samsara.
12 links of dependent origin.
Okay, so link number 8, Gepa Sempa. Can you say Gepa Sempa? Again, Gepa Sempa. So Gepa Sempa, link number 8, is about cravings. If you can get rid of your cravings, you would become an arhat. What's an arhat? Someone what? What else?
Someone who's gonna be a Buddha in less than 7 life.
That's fair to say. What else?
Someone who's had the realization of the four Arya truths.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Mm-mm. An arhat, so what's an arya?
They're different.
Yes. Good, okay, fine, this is good. So, okay, so when we're talking about Buddhism, about Hinayana and Mahayana Buddhism, right? We have a couple of different kind of milestones that we've talked about, right? We've had the direct perception of emptiness, which is what? I need a pen. Always like, right? So we have the emptiness component, right? So we have the direct perception of emptiness as one kind of milestone because they're not goals, but they're goals to me. So I'm just going to apply them to you guys. You have the direct perception of emptiness. You have nirvana, and you have enlightenment, right? So when one has a direct perception of emptiness, what does one realize? The nature of reality, and which is what? That things are not self-existent, that things don't come from their own side, right? So the example that we give historically in the three jewels has been, what is this?
A pen.
Can't even decide what what is
A writing implement.
right. So we're saying this is let's say it's a pencil. It is a pencil, right? What is this? A pencil, yeah? What happens when a dog comes into this room?
Chew toy.
And it thinks it's a chew toy, right? So then the question is this then a pencil or a chew toy?
Both.
Why?
Because it's a pencil to me and a chew toy to the dog.
Right? That makes sense. Everyone's okay with that logic, right? So then logically speaking then, if indeed it is both a chew toy and a pen, because they're both valid perceptions from both of those beings, right? Then this pen or pencil isn't considered self-existent from its own side. If it was self-existent from its own side, if this came off as being a pencil every time because it was self-existent, it would then come from the pen to you and project onto you, and you would have no choice but to accept it as being a pencil, right? All the time. And that's not the case, because the way that the world, what we're saying, fundamentally works and how it works is that you're projecting onto it based on your karma, based on your past, what this is to you, right? That makes sense. Everyone's okay with that? Okay. So then the logic then, if you carried it on, then it's how many G's are in the room?
As many as there are of us.
Yeah, and they're all valid. So the next time you get into an argument with somebody about whether or not she or he is a terrible person or not, right? You actually are having really, it's an emptiness conversation, quite frankly, because they're both valid truths. There is no one way of looking at anything. It's all based on your projection. And so when you're in deep meditation, there's an experience that you can have that we'll use in this class often as saying that you have the direct perception of emptiness. You can actually see the reality and have an experience where you can understand fundamentally where things in fact come from. It's not an exercise that you're trying to figure out and workshop every day. It actually becomes an experience. When one has a direct perception of emptiness, there are things that happen during that process. One being you actually do get to meet the Buddha, for one. You see how many future lives you have until you are no longer having human future rebirths again. You see the reality of all things, right? You have what's called the experience of the four Arya truths, which were what? the four.
Life is suffering.
Life is suffering.
Suffering is caused.
Suffering is caused.
There's an end to suffering.
There's an end to suffering.
There's a path.
There's a path. So you have that experience. So when you have the direct perception emptiness, you're an Arya, but you're not an Arhat. An Arhat has no more afflictions. They're affliction free. An Arya isn't. You can still have an affliction and still be an Arya.
So then how does reach nirvana?
No. When an Arya has bodhicitta in one's heart, they become a Buddha. But if you don't have bodhicitta in your heart, then you are in nirvana, which you become Mahayana Arya.
I'm sorry, what's an arhat?
An Arhat is a being who has no more afflictions. They're affliction free.
Isn't that the definition of nirvana?
It is a part of the definition of nirvana, yeah.
Okay.
But you haven't, so you can be an Arhat and be in nirvana, but not necessarily Buddha.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are different degrees of Arhatness. Is the term, right? So the difference between nirvana and enlightenment is what?
Bodhicitta.
And what's bodhicitta?
To reach enlightenment for the sake of all.
The wish to reach enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So if you are on the path of wanting to reach enlightenment for yourself, which isn't neither good or bad, it's just a choice of your own spiritual practice, then what we're saying is then you would reach nirvana. If you have in your heart the wish to reach enlightenment for yourself, as well as everyone, as well as all beings, you actually reach enlightenment. Yeah? Okay. So here on the 8th link, what we're saying is that if you are craving free, you actually no longer have any mental afflictions, which is what an Arhat has. There are 3 different types of cravings that we have. We have what's called dusay. Can we say dusay? That's the desire craving, which I think we all kind of know what that feels like, right? It's the craving of not wanting to lose the thing. Pretty much how most of us live, right? We usually go through our lives wanting to try to not distance ourselves from the things that we like, right? The things that we think bring us happiness. The second one is called jiksei. Can we say jiksei? So if we're not busy occupying ourselves with trying to keep the things we like close, the other thing that we do is trying to not be near something that creates fear, right? Avoiding the boss that needs to have a conversation with you, or the partner, or the parent, or the landlord, or the police officer. I don't know, you can go down your list of people you're avoiding. But, you know, things or people, situations that we avoid, fear of death, right? So there are certain types of aversions, I guess you can say, or how we're saying it here is fear of cravings, of things that create fear in our lives, unpleasant objects. Last one is, can we say C10? That's existence craving. It's the craving for me.
Like ego or?
Mm-hmm. It's your ego. It's the craving of you, the existence of you. Right? Which we'll see. I mean, I feel like, you know, I've seen it with people who are about to die that aren't ready, right? I have a grandfather who's 95 years old, and you know, the first, I think 3 times that he almost died, he was like, kill me, I'm done, I don't want to do, and he made it a whole big deal. Like he just wanted to die, and the whole family was freaked out. And the last time he almost died, I think he knew that he almost died. And prior to that, he was signing papers like, do not resuscitate, whatever, I just want to be dead, And now that he is becoming more frail and older, he does feel this last time that he does need to take care of himself. He was very close to dying. He felt it. And now, where is he at? Forget about do not resuscitate. He's been very clear, like, whatever it takes to keep me alive, you do everything. It's fascinating to see the massive extreme, because at one point I was like, oh, so glad Grandpa is like ready to go. Not that I don't want him to be around, but like at least he found peace in his process. And in fact, it's completely the flip. Like he's never hung on to life more than I've ever seen it, And so there's this constant, like, whatever it takes to be alive, right? The fear of thinking that he's not going to exist. And it's interesting too, because a man who's never really been spiritual is now, he's praying. Sometimes we ask him who he's praying to and for what. But it's fascinating to see such an extreme. But we do it all the time. That's kind of a graphic way of seeing it. But how do we every day have the fear of not existing, or I'm sure some of you have even witnessed people letting go of other people dying, right? And not knowing how to work with that and what that means. And the fear is not just that they're dying, but it also means what? Like, not that the people that they love are dying, but in fact that they themselves will be dying at some point, and they haven't quite reconciled that. So out of these three, which one would you say is your hunch that would probably trigger a rebirth of suffering? Yeah. This one's a big one.
Would you call it ignorance?
It is ignorance. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we have cravings, and then we have grasping, which is the link number 9. Can we say Gupa Lempa? Again, Gupa Lempa. So Gupa Lempa is, the definition is intensified for link number 8 to a high degree. So it's an intensified version of the desire, right? Grasping is an intensified version of the desire or the craving. The example that my teacher gave when I took this course, which I don't really like, but it is probably true, but he was giving an example of, I don't know where he heard it, but maybe it was something that was audio recording of passengers on a plane while it was crashing, and it was the minute prior to the crash that they had recorded, and you can hear the screaming that's happening, and his example was, that's grasping, because it's a heightened version of you grasping towards the end of your life. It's that fear that kicks in, that like you are no longer going to exist, So grasping is the heightened version, the intensified version. In fact, grasping is the real trigger for a karma to have a rebirth that is of suffering. So this one here is in particular the main trigger that you need to know. It's the more powerful one. And it's this grasping that is, Noga, to your point about ignorance, that's where this starts, right? It's where there's a build. I shouldn't say that's where it starts, but that's where that build is. So when in the real life you start with 2 blind men showing ignorance, it's the ignorance of grasping. It's the ignorance of not having worldview. It's the ignorance of seeing things self-existent. However, the thing that is very, very specific here is the suffering nature of one's life, it's not just being able to see emptiness directly, it's about seeing the emptiness of yourself as well. That needs to be there in order to not have a suffering rebirth. Does that make sense? Okay. So in order to have, the reason we have a suffering rebirth is because we don't see and understand the emptiness of ourselves. We see ourselves as self-existence. So there's no point, I mean, I'm not sure if that's not true. It doesn't, to have the direct perception of emptiness alone does not get you into having a life that isn't, a rebirth that isn't suffering. You have to have the direct perception of emptiness, but also understand the emptiness of yourself, which is a harder thing to grapple. It's easier to be like, yes, this is a projection. I totally get it, right? It's even easy to be like, oh, I see G, that's a projection. I totally get it, right? Like everyone here has an idea of who I am. You get that, that works, right? But to start to look at the emptiness of who you are, the emptiness of you, and the grasping of how you try to identify who you are all the time and reinforce who you are, that's what screws us over. Okay, just hang on. There's more. We're going to go into grasping. Actually, we're going to go into, we're going to go into, can you hold? Can you hold? Is that okay? Okay. Unless it's like, all right. Let's just get through this and then let me know if there's still questions. Okay. I have the statement up here. It says, Gelte jigso tralder tier lam drang por ni si me gear. It means if getting rid of any kind of this wrong view could stop your rebirth, then at the beginning of the path of seeing, you wouldn't have to take rebirth again. So basically they're saying, if indeed just getting rid of wrong view alone would get you out of a samsaric rebirth, then when you get onto the path of seeing, so when you get onto path of seeing, when you have the direct perception of emptiness is when they say you're on this path of seeing, right? So what he's basically just saying here is summarizing exactly what I said, that if indeed seeing the direct perception of emptiness, having a correct view, having a correct worldview was in fact the way out of a suffering rebirth, then you wouldn't have to have a rebirth once you have the direct perception of emptiness. And what they're saying is that's not true. You need to be able to see the emptiness of yourself as well as the emptiness of all things. That's all, okay? So we're gonna go into 4 ways of how you perceive yourself.
Could you go back 1 second to
Sure.
the other one?
Yeah. Take a picture.
Was there something before this?
No.
This is part of link number 9?
This is what?
Is this part of link number 9?
No, so this is just a statement saying that if you were to have the direct perception of emptiness only, let me rephrase, having the direct perception of emptiness alone does not get you into not having a suffering rebirth. You have, in order to avoid a suffering rebirth, you have to understand and see the emptiness of yourself so that when you're going through the dying process, there isn't a craving or a grasping to self. So we'll go into the four ways of how you perceive yourself. What I will say too, though, is if this interests you, you should really sit with it, because I think for most people, like a lifetime of a mind fuck. Just so you know. So if you're sitting there being like, what? How am I supposed to even figure out what to wear in the morning if I'm trying to like not reinforce self, you know? It's cool, it's fine, that's totally normal. Like I had someone call me today that's like, I think I'm breaking up with my partner, and I was like, great, how do you feel? Fine. And then this person's like, I don't know, am I just doing the thing I'm not supposed to be doing because I'm making, you know, it's like am I reinforcing myself by saying no to this relationship? Maybe I'm supposed to not reinforce myself and then just be in this relationship, but I'm so unhappy. And then if I'm saying I'm happy, am I reinforcing me again instead of looking at myself, you know, like went on, and I was just like listening, and like, you know, it goes on for quite some time. I mean, these are concepts that monks study for it's not an easy concept to consider at all. And so I will just say, I'm presenting them to you. Please take time, sit with them, see how they even work for you. See if they're even true. Because I get into plenty of pretty intense discussions with people about these topics. And it's always interesting to see a different perspective of how people understand it. Okay, so here we go, 4 ways. The first way is unanalyzed, unchecked, the conventional me.
What was that before? What did you say?
Before this?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the 4 ways of perceiving self. So the 4 ways basically of how you perceive you, okay? The first way is just the conventional you. It's the valid perception. It's whatever you see, you know, kind of what you see is what you get. This would be considered a sema that we've talked about in the past. It's just very direct. And there's nothing wrong with this way of thinking, by the way, at all. It's more, I mean, it's a projection, but it's more factual in the way that you would see yourself in that way, you know? Okay. The second way of how you would see yourself is seeing yourself as self-existent and believing yourself to be self-existent. Right, so how could this look for most people? Right, what does this look like for most people?
That everyone perceives the same Supriya that I do all the time.
Right. And how many of us think that most of the time? Yeah, it's interesting, right? I was just reading somewhere, or I don't know, I was at a talk or something, and people will believe what you tell them. And I'm like, really? Does that really work? And I started trying it for the week, where I was like, I want to see like if that works, you know? Because I've been like at all these meetings and like whatever. And so I've been playing with this idea where I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna tell people what I want them to believe, you know, and see if that works. And it was fascinating to watch because because sometimes it was, in fact, most of the time it was true. I mean, if you think about it, and it was interesting because when I say it was true, what was interesting is that maybe it was or wasn't true, but I just knew that my own perception of what I was projecting was not the same. And yet people seemed to be okay with that, which was strange because I found in that practice that as much as I am conditioning myself to understand the emptiness of me, and even in the practice of why can't I just say I'm this or that, how much I do reinforce who I am. In fact, and those values that I have, or qualities I see of myself as being static. you know? So there's static perception of who I think G is. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna mess with people. And so I'm playing this game like, oh, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. And people are like, sure, that's okay. And I'm like, wait, that works, but what about this? Wait, no, I'm not that. Like, you're all crazy, right? And so in that moment, I'm like, oh, tricks are for kids. No, it really does feel that way. But it felt like, oh, it's me. You know, this practice, I thought I was testing everyone else. And in fact, it became inverted where I was just realizing the lesson and the test was on me, right? So it's interesting to see like how we see ourselves self-existently all the time and how we reinforce that. I believe, right? Even just those ways of thinking or how we identify who we are with how we look or who we are with our skills, you know, our skill sets or our accomplishments or our partners or whether we have one or not, or the jobs that we have and the wealth that we have or don't have, or the families we come from. It's fascinating to watch because when you see most people in the world and you interact with them, they mostly function from a self-existent side, you know? Like they think that they are self-existent. Like I had these meetings with these women a couple of weeks ago. It was so incredibly uncomfortable. And it was interesting to watch because they had this whole persona of who they think they were based on their education and the amount of money they have and the positions that they had and the titles that they had. And they would walk in with a certain thing. And I'm like, have no idea who they are, and nor do I really even care, right? And it's interesting because it became an offense. It's like, what do you mean? You don't know who I am? I'm like, I don't know, should I know? Like now I know you, you know? And so you see these different ways of how when you start to understand this concept as well, it makes you see things, I think, differently with not just people, you know, and realizing, oh, what's going on here and how much do they understand? How much do you understand? This karma in particular, or this way of seeing yourself is the trigger, is one of the triggers to have a samsaric rebirth, by the way, okay? The third one, someone who has seen emptiness and doesn't believe in self-existence, but sees self as self-existent. So it's someone seeing yourself as self-existent, but not believing what you see because you have previously seen emptiness directly.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the magician, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, the self-existent idea is like the idea of something being fixed.
It's fixed. It's coming from it or the object or the person. So it's someone who understands that they understand that things are self-existent, that there is a that things are not self-existent. However, they understand that the concept of self, that's a self-existent concept. Does that make sense? It's basically saying they understand that the self is not self-existent. They see the emptiness in a self. And when you do reify it, that you're making that idea self-existent. The idea of self is self-existent, even though it's should not be considered. Mm-hmm. There is no self in the emptiness of you. The idea of self in itself is self-existent. Does that make sense?
So this is seeing that emptiness of things and self.
Yeah, but in particular, we're talking about self.
But isn't it saying see self as self-existent?
Yeah.
See self not?
it sees the idea, the concept of self as self-existent. Because self, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, the concept of self. Yeah.
So if I see emptiness directly,
Uh-huh.
I know that I'm not a self-existent Thomas. I still feel this pain in my back,
Mm-hmm.
even though I know it's not a pain in my back. I know it's like me karma.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Can self-existence be changing, or is it an unchanging thing?
Well, you're asking if emptiness or self-existence itself. Is self-existence changing or unchanging?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it is?
I feel like I guess it's unchanging, but.
Yeah.
If it's fixed, if it's supposed to be like, I'm always this
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
But I feel like it can change over time.
Right. So I would argue then that self-existence would be it would be considered unchanging, and that's why it doesn't make sense that you would think yourself is ever self-existent. Because like to your point, right? If how I reify myself changes, let's say year to year, how is it not to say it doesn't change moment to moment? Like at what degree based on how, you know what I mean? Like,
Could it be a tema, like having a fresh self-existent perception of yourself? I don't know.
I guess you could.
You know,
It'd be very busy. But I mean, I suppose in some ways we do that all the time. And it's probably what makes us so exhausted, you know, of finding ways to reify who we are constantly. Whether it's, and I would say not even who we are, what we believe in, what we do, why we do it, like all that, right? We're constantly finding different ways to support the decisions that we make or how we feel or the insecurities that we have or the fears that we have or the, you know, the joys that we feel. Like all that stuff is always being, if you really watch yourself, is being managed and filtered and taken in so that it shapes and supports however idea you want to create for who you are. Right? Yeah. Okay. Number 4, here we go. This is the last one. Someone who no longer sees or believes self to be self-existent. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, wait, someone who no longer sees or believes self to be self-existent. Okay. So neither seeing yourself as self-existent or believing that you are. That's what this is. Does that make sense?
That's like the idea, that's like what you want to perceive
Yeah.
yourself as, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So someone who has this refers to someone who's overcome any inborn tendencies of seeing things as self-existent and does not trigger the karma for a suffering rebirth.
Someone who overcomes what?
Huh?
Sorry, what did you say? Someone who overcomes.
The inborn tendency of seeing things as self-existent and does not trigger the karma of a suffering rebirth. What we're going to do next class too is spend some time discussing these concepts a little bit further. So I would like for all of you to just sit with it and see how it feels. And then we're going to continue discussions next week. Sound good? Great. Here we go.
Tashi Kuki Juching Mito Chang Vira Vinshin Yende Nyapadi Sange Shindu Mite Uwargi Drokun Nanda Shimla Juparsho Ilam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamyatayami Gewadi Kewokun Sunam Yeshe Suk Suk Shing Sunam Yeshe Lejung Wei Dampa Kuni Toparsho.
Take a seat. We're just going to close with a quick dedication and rejoice. Take a moment and remind yourself why you came to class this evening. Reinvigorate that motivation. Think about your efforts to really come to class, the weather, and take your motivation and your attention. Commend yourself for your efforts and dedicate it to someone you love, someone you wish would be happier, someone who you think may be in need. Dedicate your efforts, your time, your intention. Get home safely. Thank you, everyone.